Good afternoon, everyone. I know almost nothing about digital finance, fortunately, that's not my area of expertise, but I do have some thoughts, reflections, ideas to share with you today. And my own journey from England began in 1975 when I left England and traveled overseas, overland to India, and spent for a year in India and in Iran and in various places, learning about life, learning about Buddhism, which for me came to be more or less the same thing. And in 1978, I arrived in Thailand and went to Ubon, became a student of Venerable Ajahn Chah, one of the great Buddhist masters of the present generation, present age, and I've been here ever since. So one of the things that really drew me to Buddhism is that it encourages questions. I was always a very inquisitive person, and I like the fact that you're encouraged to question, you're encouraged to doubt the teachings, which seem to me quite unexpected and unique in a religious tradition, to find that doubt, rather than being something to be feared or repressed, is welcomed. And indeed, taking the Buddha's teachings as working hypothesis and then trying to prove their truth in your own life, in your own experience, rather than simply accepting them out of faith, is considered to be an act of devotion. And the Buddha called it Gan Patibat Puja. It's like showing, expressing devotion by giving the teachings enough respect to try to put them to the test of experience. So Buddhism is not dogma oriented, it's not based upon belief in dogmas. And the Buddha gave one teaching in which he said, is it possible? So this is one of the Buddha's questions. He says, is it possible to believe 100%, he didn't use the word 100%, believe completely, utterly, in something which is not true? And I think just a moment's reflection will enable you to say yes. Even if you're quite convinced that what you believe is true, then you must acknowledge that people who have different beliefs to you are mistaken. So the principle that faith, belief, confidence in any kind of proposition, whether it's religious or academic or of any kind at all, is not a proof that it must be true. So this is a really important principle. This is one of the things that I'd like to share with you today, the sense of being right and the absolute confidence in any kind of proposition is to be doubted, because it is, I would say, an irrefutable truth that it is possible for us to believe in things which are not true. So for me as a child, I started off with Father Christmas, and then it goes from there, and of increasing sophistication perhaps, but the principle remains the same. So the Buddha is recommending that we're constantly examining our assumptions, examining our basic premises. And one of the most important principles, and one which in fact is the heart of the very last teaching he gave before he left the world, was the teaching of appamada, which is usually translated into English as heedfulness. But that's not a word that's very much used in present day. The meaning of it is that nothing can be taken for granted. And is it possible to live in the world, to function in the world in that way, based upon the idea that we cannot trust, we cannot believe in anything 100%, that we constantly have to be re-establishing our balance, looking again and again at the things that we're taking for granted. There is a Japanese martial art which some of you may be familiar with, called Aikido. And one time I read an account of one of the great modern masters of Aikido. I was in discussion with one of his leading students, and the student was praising his teacher. And he said, "Master, in all the years I've been studying with you, I've never seen you lose your balance." And the master said, "You haven't been looking closely enough. I lose my balance quite a lot. But where I differ from you is that I recover my balance very quickly, so quickly that you don't notice." So there's a lot of talk about finding balance between this aspect of your life and that aspect of your life, as if there is this kind of equilibrium that you can attain and then you'll be okay. But in fact, the factors, the causes, the conditions that come to play in our life day by day, whether it's in our personal life or our working life, are so complex that balance is not really feasible over any period of time. But what you can learn to do is how to re-establish your balance when you lose it. And this is a life skill that's really worth learning. The Buddha's teachings are, in essence, an education system, and this is why it's often misunderstood, because we all tend to look at almost everything these days through Western eyes, with the assumption that the Western standard is a kind of universal standard. And so, for this reason, given that in Western culture and throughout the world, religions are identified with faith to the extent that those two words are used interchangeably. And we hear the Christian faith or the Christian religion, the Islamic religion, Islamic faith, and so on. And people just assume that that same model, that same template can be applied to Buddhism. In fact, it can't, and you will seriously misunderstand Buddha's teaching if you try to do that. So we're talking about an education system kind of religion, rather than a belief system kind of religion, if you like. Now, in this system of education, we have a holistic approach, which means that we have to look at our life in terms of our conduct, the way that we relate to our family, the people around us, our colleagues, the society we live in, at the same time as looking at our internal world of thoughts, perceptions, emotions, beliefs, etc., and also the framework of ideas and views and the way that we interpret and understand who we are, what we are in this world. Most of the Buddha's teachings are devoted to this training, this education in these three areas. Now, in this holistic system, one of the features that is well known throughout the non-Buddhist world these days is that of sati, or mindfulness. And the last few years have seen attempts to take that one teaching out of this holistic system and apply it in non-Buddhist contexts. And I think it's been quite a successful endeavor on many levels. At the same time, the meaning of the word mindfulness has shifted or has moved away from the Buddhist meaning, which is something of almost a dilemma for a Buddhist monk, because on one level we want to appreciate and show appreciation of the benefits of the secular mindfulness practices that are spread throughout the world these days, and yet at the same time to clarify in what ways it's something somewhat dissimilar or somewhat different from mindfulness as I would understand it. So without going into too many technical details, which I'm sure you're not interested in, the main idea of secular mindfulness is, as I understand it, is to develop a kind of an equanimous stance whereby you can live in a confusing, changing world without being overwhelmed by it, and being able to maintain a present moment awareness. Where this differs from Buddhist teachings is that in Buddhist teachings you have certain moral and ethical standards, and so it's not just a matter of being aware of what's happening in the present moment, but relating them to your values and your ethical, moral, spiritual commitments. So we might give an example here. Let's say just for the sake of argument, someone's a bank robber, let's say, and they're breaking into a bank vault in the middle of the night. So they're totally in the present moment and aware exactly of everything that's going on. Their minds are not caught up in memories and emotions and imaginations and fantasies, totally grounded in the present moment. But the action itself is illegal and is something that's going to cause suffering to themselves and others in the future. So in that case, the mindful approach from Buddhist sense is stop, don't do that. Whereas the kind of general understanding of mindfulness is just be aware of what's going on. Okay. So I think that it is important that to return to the theme I began this talk, is that we give ourselves time to ask ourselves questions about the big questions, the things, the big issues. Now, what what's this all about? What kind of life am I living right now? And we all have a deep need for meaning. This is something I think that clearly distinguishes us from animals, beings in other realms. That if human beings have no sense of meaning, then they tend to fall prey to mental disorders of various kinds, and physical also in many cases. So recognizing that we have, if you can accept this again as a hypothesis, that apart from our needs for food and clothing and shelter and medicines in time of sickness, we also need to feel that our life makes sense. And if we don't, we're going to be in a bad way. So the question is not, one that you may often hear is, what's the meaning of life? As if there is something out there called a meaning, just one thing that you can discover, but it's what you are currently choosing to give your life a meaning, if you feel it does have a meaning. And although you may well not have made some specific decision, this is my goal, this is what gives my meaning, gives meaning to my life. Generally, you can discover that you have some kind of organizing principle, some kind of basic ideas that you don't question, and they are what gives you that sense of purpose, what gets you out of bed in the morning, what motivates you. And it's here that Buddha is saying, stop and look at this and really question whether you've made a good choice in your goal, or is your goal correct one, a nourishing one? Is it an incomplete? Is it faulty in some way? So we can ask whether making a lot of money, that's for many people, that's their organizing principle. That's what gives their meaning to their life. You say, is that a good organizing principle? Is it something which is really uplifting and give you a sense of pride in your life, wholesome pride? Because I think that's quite a simple and easy, immediate kind of test. When you get home at night or before you go to bed at night, can you feel proud of yourself for anything you've said and done today? You can say, well, whatever the material consequences of that, I just feel good. That was a good thing to do. We're not getting into any kind of profound philosophy here. It's just, I did a good thing. I said a good thing. I feel good about that. Because that is a profit, I would say. It's not a profit that you can measure, but it's something that you can feel quite clearly. So making money, to what extent does that satisfy this deep need we have for meaning? Or is it a rather unwise, superficial substitute for something that might give us a much more beautiful life and happy life? So to be, I think many of you are familiar maybe with the kind of questions asked of young people. Say, what do you want to be when you're grown up? Now, my generation, I want to be a doctor or a sailor or a spaceman or whatever. And then over the past 20, 30 years, the answers that become more and more popular is, I want to be famous. I want to be this. It's not what people want to do, it's what they want to be. They want to be things. And from Buddhist point of view, a healthy life is based upon doing rather than being, or doing rather than believing. It's what you do. It's very practically oriented. And if in your working life the goal that you've established for yourself is something like profit, money, wealth, status, then given the fact that probably 99% of the wisest people who've ever lived in the world, and there's something of a consensus here, that those kinds of goals are not ultimately fulfilling, at the very least should be questioning them on a regular basis. You know, now I've got this amount of wealth, this amount of status, this amount of fame. Is it really doing for me what I hoped and expected? Is it a disappointment? Is there, am I falling foul of the sunken cost fallacy? You think, yeah, well, I haven't got that happiness yet, but if I keep going and keep striving away, then it will come eventually. So that's faith, isn't it? But is it based upon observation and understanding of what's really going on, or is it just hope? One well-known spiritual story is of a Sufi figure famous throughout the Middle East, throughout the world, and Mullah Nasruddin, and he's sitting on the front of his house with a big sack of chili peppers, and he eats a chili pepper and just scrunches up. He says, "Oh, that's so spicy," and he throws it away. And then he picks up another one and he does it again and again and again. And somebody asks him, "What are you doing? Why you keep eating these chilies if you don't like that taste or what it does to you?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm looking for a sweet one." So the teaching here obviously is, quite often we are working our way through a sack of chilies looking for a sweet one, and that's an interesting question. Is there any area in my life in which I am doing that? And just trying to persuade myself, if I just stick with it, I'm going to realize my dream. I'm going to that fame and wealth and thing really do answer the deepest needs of the human heart. I began by earlier talking about Buddhism as a system of education and one in which questioning is encouraged. Another factor to consider here is, how do we maximize our ability to make good decisions? What leads us to make bad decisions? So from external point of view, we can say information. To make a good decision, you need the right information, and you need all the information that's needed. But quite often we have a problem because we can't really be sure whether we have all the information we need, or perhaps there's just too much information and we don't have the time or the resources to sift through all the information. So there's that side of it. But the inner side is that our minds are very often influenced by irrational elements. And moods, emotions, prejudices, fears, anxieties, desires. And we quite often don't make as good decisions as we might. And so here the question is, in our lives at the moment, is this something that we're working on? Do we have any strategy to increase the clarity of our mind and the quality of our decision making? What exactly, and practically speaking, on a daily basis do you do to do that? And so if you're decided, like emotional stability, the ability to put down anxieties and fears and desires, to be able to look at things with a clear mind, is an important life skill, then you do need to have some regular, systematic training. And this is what, mindfulness training and meditation practice is all about. Meditation is, I think, somewhat fetishized these days. It's made into this kind of special kind of mystical thing, or it's a magic potion, a magic bullet. It's not by any means. And meditation practice is, for the most part, really hard work. If you think I'm just going to meditate and relax, you'll fall asleep. And falling asleep is not meditation, it's the opposite of meditation. In Buddhist meditation, the idea is to wake up and to be awake to your experience in as clear and bright and sharp a way as is possible. And to do that, there's a lot of donkey work. It's like you want to play a piano concerto. You have to spend a long time learning just the basic notes and how to manipulate your fingers and so on and so forth, years and years. And mental training is no different. It's hard work. And the kind of qualities that you need are patience and persistence and commitment, and you have to be very intelligent about how you motivate yourself. And the whole question of wise, unwise, constructive, destructive motivation is an intrinsic part of this kind of training. The classic analogy for wise and unwise motivation may be given by picturing an island in the middle of a lake. And let's say you have the wise and the unwise swimmer. So the unwise swimmer has their eyes fixed on the island, which is the goal. And because their eyes are fixed on the island, there are two consequences. One is that the swimmer becomes very frustrated because it seems like I'm making no progress. Why is it taking so long? So the sense of the time elapsing between our present situation and where we want to be seems unbearable. But apart from that, the second consequence is that the swimmer lifting his head out of the water and staring at the island, the goal, means that the swimming stroke is inefficient. And he's actually swimming far more slowly than he could. So the wise swimmer is one who sets his goal on the island in the middle of the lake and then puts his effort or her effort into the swimming stroke, into perfecting the swimming stroke, making this the most efficient stroke that is possible. And at the same time, he or she doesn't forget the island, just lifts his head up out of the water every now and again just to check that we're still on course. So this is the analogy for how we apply ourselves to any kind of task in the personal life, working life, as we have goals, and yet our mind does not need to be focused on the goal too much, because you'll get that sense of frustration. And that, in working life, of course, that kind of frustration, I'm not getting there, often leading to corruption, dishonesty, or slipshod work, because the work itself, the action, real life, takes a secondary role. It's a means to an end. So happiness and fulfillment and success is always in the future. It's never in the present. But someone who has developed this ability to cultivate wise motivation has a goal, and it might be a spiritual goal or a more intermediate career goal, or whatever it might be. But the majority of one's intention and effort and interest is on the quality of the work in the present moment. And every now and again, just check, I'm still on course for my goal. But here your happiness and fulfillment is coming in your real life, in the work itself, rather than the work being a means to an end. It's an end in itself. And if you have that kind of interest and commitment to try to increase the quality of the work itself, then the goal will tend to arrive. It's not you're making some kind of noble sacrifice of success for some kind of spiritual high in the daily life. These things are compatible, they're one and the same. So I'm sure in your careers and in your life generally, you will have come across very smart people doing very stupid things. This for me has been an object of interest since I was a teenager, and teachers at my school are people, and generally I think, she's so smart, she's so clever, why would you? And seeing that as human beings, we can be very intelligent in certain areas of our life and very stupid in other areas of life. We're not just one thing or the other. We can have very many intelligent moments in a day, interspersed with a number of very consequential, stupid moments in a day. It's the nature of the human mind. We can be blinded by all kinds of mental factors, and the cognitive fallacies, like where, for example, the most common one where we give weight and importance and interest to information and views and opinions that support ones that we have already, and we minimize or ignore views and opinions that clash and undermine the views we have already. This fundamental weakness of the human mind, it's more of a problem with educated people than uneducated people. Because if you're educated, you are able to justify your conduct and justify your beliefs in the face of conflicting information far more successfully than people who don't have that kind of intellectual training. So intellectual training is a two-sided sword. It's not just a good thing in itself. And this is why meditation, coming back to this, or the willingness to stand back from your life and look at the big picture every now and just settle into the real world. And your real world's not in a screen. Real world is what you're seeing with your eyes right now, what you're hearing, the smells, the tastes, the physical sensations, the mental factors arising. This is your real world. And we're talking about the digital world. That's a subset of the real world. It's not like your life is a subset of the digital world. It's not like that's the reality that we have to adapt to. That's one part of our life, but we tend to lose our contact with how we're really feeling about things, what's really going on in our lives. So at the same time as within a second, we can know what a loved one's having for lunch in a restaurant halfway around the world, and yet be blind to most basic things that are going on in our own hearts, not because we can't know these things, that we don't have the capacity. We do, but we're not interested enough. We don't really think it's important, or we think it's a kind of distraction from the real work, which is making money and all these things, or doing our other duties. So I'm not meaning to diminish the importance of careers and worldly goals, but I think that there's a lack of balance and interest in the person who's living this life. And it's not so difficult to find some time. Early in the morning is the best time, and just say, be with your breath coming in and coming out, and just settle down into the present moment and look and listen. And often you think of things will just come up in a very natural way that you've been repressing because it's so easy to hold stuff down with a busy lifestyle. There's always something that you need to attend to, something you need to be doing. And so you can turn away from the inner world so easily. And the opportunities we have for distraction these days are unprecedented, as you know. You can get away without spending any time with your own mind for days at a time. Have so many things that can take you away from the simple reality, the basic, fundamental reality of being a living human being. So you have to make time. The time won't appear just by itself. And then you have a basic exercise, for example, being aware of the breathing process in breath, something very, very simple. And that's the point. It has to be simple. You don't want to be thinking about it. And that provides a screen on which you can see what's really going on in your mind these days. And things will sort of just float to the surface. You say, well, why am I making such a fuss about such a small, insignificant thing? And you suddenly just see, it's just not worth it. And also, there can be, on the other side of the coin, in the sense of, this is not a small thing at all. This is important. I really need to deal with this. I can't just keep procrastinating and putting off. I really need to see to this right now. So you're communicating with yourself. We communicate. We're in contact with people through WhatsApp and FaceTime and internet, etc., etc., etc. But we've lost the art of communicating with ourselves. And so whether we're living in the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Machine Age, the Atomic Age, the Digital Age, certain basic realities never change. And this human life, we don't want to suffer, we want to be happy, we want to have a life we can that has some sense of meaning and purpose. We constantly are our own worst enemies. The Buddha himself said there's no enemy in the world, is as vicious and nasty and as your own mind, which has not been trained. And there's no friend you can find in the world which would excel your own mind that's been well trained. So we're human beings, and we have this capacity for inner peace. We have the capacity to find a real sense of happiness within us and a life in which we can feel that apart from an inner contentment and sense of wellness and flourishing within, we can also feel that we are contributing to the well-being and the happiness and the welfare of those around us. And those two things have to go together. And if you are giving time to yourself and your own spiritual welfare in whatever form and whatever tradition that may take, that if that's correctly followed, then you should be seeing positive effects on the relationships with the people around you, with your family and with your colleagues. And if you are learning to be more open and empathic and interested in the welfare of others, and trying to act in ways and speak in ways which contribute to a warm and friendly and constructive atmosphere, then that also affects your own sense of well-being. So the more that you are cultivating your own heart, if it's done in the correct way, and I'm not saying this has to be in the Buddhist way necessarily, there are other traditions, but if it's correct, you're doing it well, you will find a ripple effect going out into your family and the people around you. And when you're trying to contribute, not just to your own standing and status and progress, but when you are giving thought to ideas of fairness and kindness and acting in a correct way, then that affects your mind. So the inner affects the outer affects the mind. So to summarize, again, encouraging you to give yourself some time to be with yourself, to learn from what's going on in your mind, and learning to the basic life skills. How do you look after your mind in such a way that greed and anger and jealousy and depression and anxiety cannot overwhelm you? If those things have already arisen, how can you cultivate your mind in such a way to let them go? Of all the good and noble qualities that human beings throughout the world have developed, how can you bring into your own heart those qualities that you, as so far, still lack? And if there are good qualities that you notice within yourself, then how do you systematically care for them and cultivate them and bring them to maturity? This is the essence of a well-balanced life, and life is change. It's always been change, and human beings have always had to deal with change. It's not just suddenly, we're living in this rapid change that human beings have never experienced before. If you look in the past, in Europe in the 14th century, there's the plague, wiped out about half of the population of Europe. There have been wars and terrible conflicts, and we've had the nuclear threat and so many different threats. Now we have climate threats and AI threat. This is just part of being human. It's always been this way. But we can cultivate qualities within us that allow us to say, yeah, I know change. I understand change. I understand change within my body and mind, how it works. I understand the fundamental principles of change and how they work, both inner and outer. I'm not afraid of change. I know how to deal with change. So we make change the object of our study, and then whatever the particular nature of the changes that we have to meet in our lives, whether it be separation from things and people we love, or having to deal with things that we don't like, and etc., then we know we have the resources to be able to flourish, not just to survive, but to flourish however the world may change in future. So these are the few words and reflections I'd like to share with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Venerable Ajahn Chayasaro, for your wisdom that shared with us. So in the spirit of your sharing that the inquiry is important, so I would like to open a Q&A, but with interest of time, maybe just limit to 1 or 2 questions. If any, for the floor, if anybody have question for the Ajahn Chayasaro. Maybe I can start with from listening. You are talking about mindfulness and finding the meaning of in oneself life. I was just wondering, by listening, does it apply to, or how do you see it apply to society or organization? Is it like, does it mean as an organization, maybe like as a BOT, to have a mindfulness? Or is it only apply more on like individual level? Or maybe
to return to a point I made in the talk, that I don't see mindfulness as sort of a separate, independent kind of quality that you can just sort of add on to your life and then solve all your problems. It's part of a larger kind of strategy and systematic way of living in the world. And so with the popularity of the secular mindfulness, there have been some interesting kind of pushback, and I think it's, for example, there are large companies in the States who, to put it bluntly, rather take advantage of their employees. So that movement we've seen over the past years of increasing workload and decreasing the workforce, so people getting really stressed out. And so these companies are providing like mindfulness courses. And so they're not taking any responsibility for the fact that the structure, the way that things are set up in the company are conducive towards stress, because they're just too much for people to be able to deal with. But now it's like, your problem is you don't have enough mindfulness. You practice mindfulness and you'll be all right. So this is a way that spiritual teachings can be employed in worldly ways, and that, rather than being a way of improving quality of life, they're just like sticking plasters or just ways of avoiding the basic issues. So although Buddhism says everything begins with the mind, it doesn't say everything's in the mind, because the Buddha says you need to look at structures and creating structures, whether these are laws or regulations, agreements, things which are in harmony with the principles of Dhamma and human flourishing. Because if you have meditation practices and techniques, even if you have enlightened teachers, but you're living in a unskillful way, or the way that you're living together is stimulating all the defilements and the qualities which you're trying to abandon in meditation, it's like 1 step forward and 2 steps back. So there has to be this kind of integrated approach to, not just individual mindfulness, but how do we cultivate communities, how do we cultivate workplaces in which people can not only make a living, but they can actually find some happiness and really look forward to going to work every day and meeting friends. And that's not too idealistic. If you have some basic agreements and how we want to live together. So if you have a situation where a company or organization is emphasizing competition between people in the same room, in the same office, then I would say there's real problems with that. Some years ago, I was in China, and some teachers were telling me that they have this competition in schools, where big school, and maybe you have like 7 or 8, say, third grade classes, and then the teacher who teaches the class which has the lowest overall success rate gets sacked at the end of the year. And so there's competition between the teachers, but that's not what you want in a school. You want teachers to be sitting and sharing experiences and how to deal with difficult kids and supporting each other when they're having a difficult time. So you're actually undermining the long-term goals of the school for short-term goal of exam success. And so in many organizations you have this two conflicting forces, this idea, it's almost like a religious dogma that whenever you introduce competition, you'll have an increase in efficiency. And I would say it's very unscientific. It's not proved at all by data. And that at the same time, you want to have a healthy, thriving community. But if you're stimulating two conflicting things at the same time, it's not going to work very well. So mindfulness is just one part of it. It's part of a much bigger picture about how do we want to live together as human beings. And,
Thank you. Anybody in the floor? Maybe just one last question.
ได้
อาจารย์ครับพยายามที่จะสงบแต่ก็ไม่สงบแล้วเราจะอยู่กับสิ่งนั้นได้ไงท่านอาจารย์ชากับอาจารย์สุเมโธได้เคยให้คำสอนหรือแนวทางไว้ไหมครับ
สงบช่างมันไม่เป็นไรไม่ต้องสงบก็ได้แต่ให้รู้เท่าทันสิ่งที่ไม่สงบคือเวลาเราภาวนาเพื่ออะไรเพื่อจะได้เห็นเพื่อจะได้รู้เท่าทันสิ่งที่ไม่สงบอยู่ในใจเพราะก่อนจะถึงความสงบต้องปล่อยวางสิ่งที่ไม่สงบจะข้ามไปเลยไปสู่ความสงบถ้าได้มันจะเป็นมิจฉาสมาธิจะเป็นความสงบที่ขาดปัญญาทุกครั้งที่เรานั่งสมาธิเราก็จะมีสิ่งท้าทายต่างๆเป็นข้อมูลเป็นสิ่งสะท้อนว่าทุกวันนี้จิตใจเราเป็นยังไงมันหนักไปทางไหนมันวิตกกังวลเรื่องอะไรทุกวันนี้จิตฟุ้งซ่านไหมอาจจะเป็นเพราะว่าเรารับข้อมูลอะไรเข้ามาในสมองเกินกำลังของสมองดังนั้นก็ต้องเปลี่ยนวิถีชีวิตไม่ใช่ว่าปัญหาที่เกิดขึ้นระหว่างการภาวนาจะแก้โดยเทคนิคในการภาวนาเพราะปัญหาที่เกิดขึ้นในการภาวนาสะท้อนถึงปัญหาในชีวิตประจำวันซึ่งในบางเรื่องการแก้โดยการเปลี่ยนความคิดโดยการฝึกสติอย่างสม่ำเสมอต่อเนื่องแต่ในบางเรื่องเป็นข้อมูลที่จะต้องปรับวิถีชีวิตของเราบ้างเพราะไม่ไหวอย่างเงี้ยเพราะฉะนั้นไม่สงบก็ไม่ใช่ว่าเป็นสิ่งเลวร้ายและเป็นการพิสูจน์ว่าเราไม่มีบุญไม่มีบารมีคือเป็นข้อมูลที่จะทำให้เราสามารถพัฒนาชีวิตได้ Shall I translate or is most people here Thai single
yes thank you very much so unfortunately so as a representative for everybody here I would like to express our deepest gratitude for the Venerable Ajahn Chayasaro for sharing your wisdom with us today and so I would like to hand things over to the MC and lastly I would like to also กราบขอบพระคุณพระอาจารย์มากนะครับที่มาช่วย yes so this is the end thank you